finally on the show, we have one more thing, and this is something that's probably going to take a little bit of explanation, Alex, because
Oh, good.
I told
Explain me the things.
I told you what it was, but it leads a lot to the imagination. So yes, exactly. I couldn't hear you, but I imagine you were miming.
It's just the rainbow with imagination.
Oh yeah,
You can add that
imagination.
in post.
Perfect. I love that. More work. I love that. Um, so we were talking about Uncharted, but if we were talking about BioShock or Fallout, you'll probably experience this. I wanted to talk a little bit about setting up that moment that I have referred to as the Welcome to Jurassic Park moment. What that basically is that moment where we go from sort of a regimented, corridored world, where we're kind of being introduced to some framework of what we are in, to the moment where all of a sudden it just opens up, and you kind of see the full scope of what your game is.
Is that like Fallout 3 when you leave the vault?
That's right. That would be what I refer to as Welcome to Jurassic Park.
And you see the wasteland, or when you leave the vault in Fallout 4 and see again the wasteland.
The wasteland. After you had been introduced to a small section of it, you saw sort of like the world before, and then when you come back up and you get introduced to this as your actual landscape that has been destroyed. New Vegas, it's actually the moment you leave Doc Mitchell's house, because you're introduced to Good Springs.
And then Skyrim would be the moment you leave the cave.
It's after the cave. It's that
moment. Or it's the moment you leave Bleak Falls Barrow and you see the rest of Skyrim right in front of you from atop the mountain.
You might think of it that way. BioShock actually kind of made this like a thing in basically all the games, where Andrew Ryan is explaining to you basically why he made Rapture as you're descending down. And then all of a sudden, from those cards and from that, you hear him say, and thus I created Rapture. And the second you hear Rapture, you suddenly go from this like elevator shaft and see out into the world, and you now see the entirety of Rapture. And in Infinite, they do the same thing, but in a different way, where you go into the lighthouse, and you get catapulted up into the sky, and you go through the cloud level, and then after you get through the cloud level, the sun comes down on top of you, and you see Columbia in its entirety.
I think I understand the Welcome to Jurassic Park moment.
Right, because I thought to myself, every time I see that, I do think about that moment in Jurassic Park, where like they open the doors, and all of a sudden the theme song comes in, and the brontosauruses are all over the place, and it's like...
Yeah, it's the reveal.
That moment. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because some games have done it pretty well, and I would argue that maybe some games haven't. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those examples.
So I'm gonna guess it has to be dependent on the genre of the game. Open world or adventure games probably have a better time doing that, I'd assume, and maybe some RPGs.
Right.
Than, say, your strategy games and your similar simulation type games.
Yeah. I think it does have to lend itself a little bit. Open world or sandbox games are going to be more prone to have this moment just because there is an open landscape to go to. But for that matter, I'm trying to think that if I were looking at even my walking sims or my narrative games. Sometimes they
those as well can have a same feel.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, which is also just a really great game if you've never played it, but What Remains of Edith Finch. And there is, although it's very subtle, they don't really announce it so much. The start of the game is where you are walking down this road that leads to the Finch house, which is a very eclectic house. If you're familiar with just the graphics on the box art, you can tell that it's just a really oddly built out house for every single room for every member of the family. You don't really see it so well when you're up the road and sort of in the woods, But then as you kind of approach the house and get closer to it, the woods sort of peel back a little bit, and you can actually see more of the entirety of the house. And it's when you actually walk up to the doors and start to see the enormity of it that you kind of get that reveal that this is where we're going to be spending the game. Even though it is far more regimented, and for the most part after that has you crawling through individual corridors in the house, they do take that one little moment where you can actually see the entirety of the building. You know, you can kind of make it out from there. I would make an argument that some Fallout games have done this far better than others.
Sure, definitely.
Because I actually thought they did a great job with New Vegas when you actually leave Doc Mitchell's house. You've gotten a little bit of explanation of the world, and you open the door, and the next scene you see, there's a bright light that hits you that I always appreciate, where it's like your eyes are adjusting to the wasteland, and when it fades away and you can actually see clearly, you've been presented with a lot of information right up at the front. You're seeing all of Good Springs. You see Victor just moving along on his little wheel right across the road. There's tumbleweeds. You see all of the buildings. You can kind of see New Vegas in the background all the way over there. There's this roller coaster thing up the road. You're being presented with a whole lot of information right out of the gate for the first time. I would say that they did that better in New Vegas than they did it in 3, just because when you leave the cave, and when you leave the vault in 3, it might be a while since you played, but basically, you know, your eyes still adjust. It does that moment where things are a little blurry, but there's still quite a bit of cave around you. Like, it's set into the mountain.
Right.
And so your vision is actually much more limited. You only have about this kind of scope of the wasteland the second you get out there. In New Vegas, they have like this kind of scope all around you. 4 does an okay job of it, but
kinda. I mean,
I don't see.
You kind of see a bit of Boston first, but then when you come out, you actually see like the rest of it.
Yeah. I think the one problem that they have with Fallout 4, when they actually have that moment, the reveal, is that it's not that interesting on face value. You're through the trees, like the trees are all over the place. And so I'm kind of seeing a little bit of Concord. I think it's Concord that's like the first place that you see.
Yeah, see, for Fallout 4 would be a little bit more dynamic, I think, if you exited a different location than you entered the vault.
Yeah, that would have been helpful.
Like, if you entered the vault through like the side of a mountain, maybe you came out on a different entrance, like a helipad up top. That would be good. So you're like more up. I know Boston doesn't really have mountains in it.
No.
So bear with us. But like maybe you came out at a lookout tower or something like that, so you could see a bigger like view of the land of just the devastation from that.
Yeah, that would have been very helpful. Because unfortunately, with 4, I say it did an okay job just because I can see all around me. I'm getting like lifted up into the world. But then when I actually get lifted up into the world, I can't really see much. There's just a lot of obstruction, and
and it's just kind of bland.
It is. I don't know if it's just a problem with doing post-apocalypses, where it's like things are kind of gray, and maybe it's not so, impressive when you. But
it's kind of like if you were to come out and you're suddenly you're in a desert. It's like, okay, well, cool. The reveal is nice because I'm just suddenly walking out into a desert, like in Fallout 3, I guess, or New Vegas. But it's sand. It's a lot of sand.
Yep.
Boy, look at all that sand.
Yeah. Look, there's a broken down car. Cool. We got that going on. It's not necessarily so impressive in that regard. We've played quite a few of the Elder Scrolls games. They always do have that moment to varying effects of usefulness.
Yeah, usually it's right after you escape from prison.
Yep, you've escaped from a prison, and now you have to go out into the world. It's true. Basically, almost every Elder Scrolls game is you're escaping from prison of some kind.
Right.
I don't know if it worked very well in like Oblivion, because when you kind of like leave the prison, it's like just there's some water.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think the one thing you can see is like the spire.
I think you might be able to see the spire. Yeah, but it's very minimal. Like they don't do a terrific job there. Skyrim, you're really seeing the road when you leave the cave, so not so much. I would actually say out of the three like main Bethesda ones, like the 3D ones that we're used to, I don't know. I think Morrowind might have actually worn it better in this case, because in Morrowind you're on the boat. You kind of like make your character on the boat, and then when you leave the boat, you see this whole starting area with the niche over here at the post, and these buildings and all these people around, and you're like, oh wow, okay, there's so many places I can go now. There's so much stuff I can do. So there is that. I keep thinking about it, I think, mostly just because when I look at games now, I'm curious as to when they're going to have that moment.
Yeah.
Or if they're ever going to get to that point. What they consider to be that point. Right now, I went back to playing, I should say, Horizon Zero Dawn. That's an open world. I feel like they wanted to have multiple instances of that when you get into different areas, where you're kind of getting that reveal. But ironically, I think one of the first places where it does that and stops being a linear path that's kind of taking you through and holding your hand to a place that's brand new is not when you're getting revealed to the world, but when you actually fall down into a cave. Because there's a point where Aloy's really young, that kind of sets up the whole story, where you're learning some basics, and you're being held by the hand and going down a road. It's very basic stuff. And then she falls into this cave. And when you get into the cave, you're going through some little passageways, and after you get out of those passageways, though, you see a more open cave system, but also one that has a ton of this old technology that you're not supposed to go and explore. They kind of set up this idea that in this world, these places are forbidden. You're not supposed to go into these caves because this is technology that led essentially to like the ruin of mankind. So, and somebody must know that. So now you got all these glowing lights and all of this ancient tech that you don't understand, and all of a sudden it's just being revealed to you in a moment after you kind of like crawl through a little chasm. You kind of get into this much larger thing, and it's subtle and it's underground, but it's sort of in that vein of doing a reveal. Now, when you have a game, I don't know if you've played any recently that had that moment. I don't know if like Lost Ark or Pokemon happened to do something like that.
Pokemon kind of has that. I think when you leave the village for the first time, they have the look at the area in front of you. It's just vast open wilderness kind of deal.
Sure. That's good. In the older Pokemon games, they really just, it's like you leave Pallet Town or something like in the first one.
Yeah.
It's supposed to open up a little bit more. I don't know if necessarily you get the cinematic grandeur of it so as much. Actually, the Ascent did a really good job of it, I thought.
Did they?
Well, because it's subtle. They do a subtle job of it, but if you're thinking about it, you can appreciate it. Because they'll do a change of angle. You start out in what they call the Stinkworks, I think is what it's the underbelly of the city. The underbelly of this world. And so you're going through these corridors, it's just steam vents and these little ghoul dudes that are coming and hitting you. And you get up to the first level, basically, the main level of the game. And when you're going along that corridor, it pans out over the entire city. And so now you're seeing the just sheer amount of assets that they were willing to put into this game, and kind of get this shock of just how much is in that world. And there's moments when you're kind of going along there where, you know, it kind of pans so that you can see more of the actual city itself rather than the top-down view. The first place I think it actually reveals that is when you're coming up to this giant corridor where you have a few options to go to before you get there in the Stinkworks. And the camera just goes from the top-down view and then goes, like, if you're here and the camera's up here, it just goes whoop, like right in back of you so that you can see out in front of you. And I think that that's a really interesting idea. They do it several times in the game when you get out onto balconies or something like that. Or if you're going down a corridor and they want you to see on the side, so it's almost more side-scrolly at that moment, they will change that perspective for you to kind of give you more of the cinematic scope of what you're getting into.
Gotcha.
What I am wondering, though, is if we apply this to a tabletop game...
Well, that's hard because there's no visuals.
There's no visuals. Exactly. So how the heck am I supposed to set up some grand
You have
vision?
to do a really well-written description.
Yeah. Okay.
Description, environmental details, and like sensory details are what you would need for tabletop to do that.
Right. Because I feel like the narrative part of that is sort of like after maybe the first quest or something and you get into like an actual hub area, trying to kind of like make that hub area interesting, like trying to make it something. In Psychonauts 2, they do that where you start off the game in one particular level, and Psychonauts levels are a little bit linear in the way that they are built. When you get out of that, really the first place that they put you is in the Psychonauts headquarters. And the second you go in there, you kind of like go up the little elevator shaft, there's just a ton of people, and they're floating around, and there's platforms all over the place. And I can imagine that it's a little hard to actually describe that, like I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah.
And make it as impactful as if there were graphics and sound design and all of these elements that are being brought into the picture as that. Do you think... Because I've never built a game.
Me either.
I have never designed a game, but I wonder how much that moment factors into the actual presentation of the game for people. If that's something that they thought about.
For
like,
tabletop or for video games?
Well, as you said, tabletop is a hard one because you have to be able to develop the actual narrative. I'm thinking about video games at the moment. Because
when video games, the ones that pay attention to it, you know they pay attention to it.
Yeah. Because if I'm thinking about it as much as I am, I wonder, there must be a conscientious decision to do that.
Yeah, for the games that do it,
mm-hmm.
It is conscious. For the games that don't do it, it's not.
Right.
Pretty easy distinction there.
Sure. So, I guess when it comes to the tabletop, like we were talking about, have you seen any resources, since we're looking at modules and stuff like that, where they actually try to accomplish that? Or I think because of the medium, it might be something that they kind of punt?
Well, I haven't really been looking for it, so I haven't found any resources. But I think you could do it. You'd have to have you'd want to evoke sensory details, and you'd want to try to evoke some emotion from the scene you're trying to display. Like if you're trying to show a city of splendor, be like, you could be like, the winds and the crystal spires, and seeing the sun glisten through the glass of the city brings a tear to your eye as you have give them something to connect it with, maybe. That way they can have even if it's just in character, an emotional response attached to it.
Sure. That
might help. But otherwise I'm not entirely sure, because you'd have to write it in such a way that you'd basically need to be an author.
Sure.
Who knows what the hell they're doing.
Right.
To evoke that kind of response in mental imagery.
Yeah, and I wonder if it is harder if you're trying to present that for multiple people at the same time, because all of the examples that I just gave about that moment is for single player experiences in video games, not for multiplayer experiences where you might be with 5 different people.
Yeah,
that
it's
are
a bit
doing
harder when you're trying to do it to a varied audience.
Right.
So,
Because what we're kind of talking about is the curated aspect of an experience.
well, I think in that case too, it's you don't aim it at the characters themselves, you aim it at the players.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And this does speak more to the world building aspect, where you're trying to give a lot of information about that world very quickly. So yeah, you kind of have to be able to describe it very well if you don't have the resources available. Or, hopefully, maybe there's art. Maybe there's a piece of art that you can just show people, this is the city we're in.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And right over the largest building in the city, you see, welcome to Jurassic Park.
There you go. Legally non-distinct Jurassic Park ripoff.
Welcome to Triassic Adventure.
Welcome to Cretaceous Plaza.
Welcome to Cretaceous Pleistocene Plaza.
There you go, perfect.
There we go.